I usually post lunchbox drawings like these that I make for my kids, but since some of you asked, I'm going to post a bit about my drawing process. My process breaks down into 3 steps, which is a pencil outline, a pen outline, and then coloring with alcohol-based markers. None of these I'm the best at, so I recommend for pencil outlines you watch and read figure and perspective tutorials. The same goes for pens. I always start thin, you can always go bigger, and don't be afraid to flick your pen. Lastly, do the same for alcohol markers. There's a lot of really good technique videos out there. I really like the flicking technique. Now in terms of materials, starting with paper, I always use Bristol Smooth. To me, brand doesn't matter all that much, just find heavyweight smooth paper that can take alcohol markers like these Copics. Now from there, to prevent raggedy edges, I use a paper cutter like this to cut these into equal sizes to get started. Then I pick a reference image, and today, since JJK Season 3 is coming out, I picked Yuji Itadori. Now onto the first of the 3 steps that I use. We're going to start with the pencil outline. This is the part where things can become difficult, because unless you have tons and tons of practice drawing, it's going to be very difficult for you to get proportions and shapes of people's faces just by looking at a reference image. The only thing I can recommend for you outside of tons of practice is just use an eraser. I'm a prolific eraser. I mess up all the time and I iterate a bunch. Here's where I landed on the pencil step. Now we'll move on to step 2, which is fine lines. My tips for the pen stage are: start with a fine line. I use a Micron 005. And don't get too focused on following your pencil lines. Don't forget to look at your reference image. You might find something that looks better and you can ink it that way. I love this eraser step. You take away all the underlying pencil lines and it just looks so neat. Now on to step 3, which is alcohol markers. One of the hardest steps for me. Now I'm not paid or sponsored, but I highly recommend Copic markers. They're very predictable, they're less streaky than the others, and they've got a really good color selection. I really like these Copic Chows because I think they have a lot of good skin tones. I primarily use those as skin tones. I always test out my colors on a scrap piece of paper against the reference image as well to make sure it looks as close to the source as possible. From there I move on to coloring. And again, I'm not the best at this, and I actually do most of these school lunchbox drawings for my kids in a rush. So I recommend you take a deep dive on alcohol-based marker technique videos. I've done that, but I have 2 kids, which means I crank out 10 drawings like this a week, so I don't have the time in the day to actually apply all these techniques, unfortunately. The one thing I'm pretty confident saying is I start with the base skin color first, and I do that for a couple reasons. First, it's easier to shade the darker colors over the top of the skin color when you're doing the shading on the face. Second, it helps to prevent the alcohol-based markers from bleeding onto the face from surrounding stuff like hair or clothes or just background work. And lastly, it's easier to cover over mistakes that are lighter in color versus those that are darker. And I actually apply the same principles to clothing. For example, I started off with a lighter color here and I didn't think it was true to the image, so I could go over it in darker. If I did it in reverse, that couldn't have happened. Now this is how I end every one of my school lunchbox drawings. I do a cool little background color with a fun little pattern and a fun lunchbox note. And today's was a little tongue-in-cheek, but here's how it turned out. Again, this video is much more about the process that I use to make my drawings with the little bits of info here and there. If anybody's interested in a more detailed video about how I sketch or how I use my pen or how I color, just let me know. And also, if you've got tips for me, please drop them in the comments.